The morning sun climbed over the wide prairie, turning the dry grass into waves of gold. A cool breeze carried the smell of sage and dust across the lonely hills of Montana Territory. Horses grazed behind old wooden fences while wagons rolled slowly toward the little frontier town. Jacob Carter guided his horse along a narrow trail leading to a rocky hill that everyone in the county called worthless. The land was covered with stones. Thin patches of grass fought to grow between the rocks. No rich black soil waited for crops. No wide river crossed the land. Most ranchers would not even let their cattle graze there. Months earlier, Jacob's late uncle had left him only this rocky hill. The fertile valley below had gone to richer relatives who laughed as they signed the papers. "That hill won't feed a rabbit," one rancher had joked. Another shook his head. "You'd be better off selling it for firewood." Jacob never answered. He simply smiled, tipped his hat, and rode home. He believed every piece of land deserved respect. Each sunrise he cleared stones by hand. He built small rock walls to stop rain from washing away the little soil that remained.
Look at him, all alone up there.
He planted tough
joke.
native grass and
Leave him
dug
to his
deep channels
rocks.
that
We
could
have better
catch
things
every
to do
drop
in the
of water.
valley.
People passing on horseback laughed at the lonely cowboy working among rocks. Still, Jacob kept working. Every evening he sat beside a small campfire outside his cabin, looking over the quiet hill glowing beneath the setting sun. "I'll give you every chance I have," he whispered to the land. The wind answered softly through the tall grass. Far away, a young woman watched the lonely rancher from another trail, wondering why a man would work so hard for land everyone else had already given up on. She had no idea their lives were about to change forever. A few days later Jacob rode into town with fresh eggs and 2 sacks of dried beans to trade.
Thank you so much.
The little town bustled with wagons, horses, children, and ranch hands. Near the general store, he noticed a young woman struggling to lift a heavy sack of flour into a wagon. Without saying a word, Jacob stepped forward. "May I help?" The woman looked up with kind gray eyes. "I can manage." Jacob smiled gently. "I believe you can. But 2 hands are stronger than 1." She laughed quietly. "All right." Together they lifted the sack. "My name's Emma Brooks," she said. "Jacob Carter." She had recently arrived after losing her father to illness. With no family left, she hoped to earn a living teaching children and growing a small vegetable garden beside an old cabin near the edge of town. When Jacob mentioned his rocky hill, Emma smiled instead of laughing. "I've seen it. Most people only laugh. Maybe they don't see what you see." Her answer surprised him. Later that afternoon Jacob found her wagon stuck in thick mud after a short rain. Without hesitation he unhitched his horse, tied a rope to the wagon, and slowly pulled it free. Emma brushed mud from her dress. "You keep helping people. My father used to say kindness costs less than regret." She remembered those words long after they rode in different directions. As the golden sun disappeared behind distant mountains, both wondered if they might meet again. Neither realized that the hardest days of their lives were drawing closer. Summer arrived with bright skies and warm winds. Emma often visited Jacob's rocky ranch after finishing lessons at the small schoolhouse. At first she simply brought fresh bread or coffee. Soon she began helping. Together they carried stones to build stronger terraces across the hillside. Jacob showed her how rainwater could be guided into small ponds instead of rushing downhill. Emma planted wildflowers between rows of hardy vegetables to attract bees. "The land is smiling," she said one evening. Jacob chuckled. "I think you're the one making it smile." Their friendship grew quietly. Some evenings they rode horseback along narrow mountain trails. Other nights they cooked beans over a campfire while stars filled the dark sky. Emma spoke about missing her family. Jacob shared how losing his parents years earlier had left him believing he would always be alone. "You don't seem alone anymore," Emma said softly. Jacob looked toward the fire instead of answering. One afternoon dark clouds gathered over the prairie. Old rancher Thomas Reed stopped by. "The weather feels strange," he warned. "I've never seen the birds leave this early." Within weeks, no rain came.
Perfect.
The creek shrank.
Thank you, my love.
Grass turned brown. Dust covered the valley. The rich farms below began drying under the blazing summer sun. People who once laughed at Jacob suddenly looked worried. His rocky hill, protected by its stone terraces and deep water channels, still held enough moisture for green grass to survive. But no one knew the drought was only the beginning. Far beyond the western mountains, heavy storm clouds were already forming, carrying a danger that would soon test every heart in the valley. For nearly 3 months, the sun burned over the valley without mercy. The once green fields turned brown, and cracks spread across the dry earth. Rivers became shallow streams, and ranchers watched helplessly as their crops failed and their cattle grew weak. Jacob's rocky hill was different. The stone terraces slowed the little rain that had fallen earlier in the year. The deep channels he had dug carried every precious drop into small ponds hidden among the rocks. The grass remained green enough to feed his horses and a few cattle. One morning, several ranchers rode to his cabin. The same men who had laughed at him now removed their hats. "We were wrong," one admitted quietly. "Could we buy some hay?" Jacob looked at the tired men and their hungry horses. "You don't have to buy it," he said. "Take what your animals need." Emma smiled proudly as the ranchers thanked him. "You're helping the people who mocked you," she whispered. Jacob answered gently, "Hard times should soften hearts, not harden them." A week later, the weather changed without warning. Dark clouds rolled over the mountains. Thunder echoed across the plains.
Hold tight! Just a little further!
A cold wind
Hurry,
bent
children!
the trees
Up the
until they
hill!
groaned.
We're almost there! Keep moving!
Then the rain came.
Look, he's coming! He's
It
safe!
poured day and night. The dry ground in the valley could not absorb the water. Creeks became roaring rivers. Fences broke apart. Barns floated away. Fields disappeared beneath muddy floodwater. Families climbed onto rooftops, praying for rescue. From the top of the rocky hill, Jacob and Emma watched the valley disappear beneath the rising flood. Jacob saddled his horse. "We can't stay here while others need help." Emma climbed onto her horse beside him. "I'm coming too." Together they rode into the storm. The rain beat against their coats as they guided their horses through rushing water. Jacob rescued an elderly couple trapped inside a wagon. Emma wrapped frightened children in dry blankets after bringing them safely to the rocky hill. Their small cabin quickly became a shelter for neighbors who had lost everything. The hill stood firm. The rocky ground held strong while the valley below remained flooded. For 3 days, Jacob barely slept. He repaired broken fences, carried supplies, cared for injured horses, and comforted worried families. Emma cooked soup over the fireplace, treated small injuries, and sang gentle songs to calm frightened children. One evening, after the storm finally passed, they stood together watching the sunset paint the wet hills with golden light. Emma looked at Jacob. "You built more than a ranch." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You built hope." Jacob was silent for a long moment. "I only tried to do what was right." She smiled.
We made it.
Yes, we did.
"That's why people
It's
trust
beautiful.
you." Their hands touched as they looked across the quiet valley. Neither pulled away. Old Thomas Reed walked toward them carrying a worn leather hat. "The whole county is talking about you too," he said with a grin. "Without this hill, many of us wouldn't be standing here today." Jacob looked toward Emma. The laughter that once followed him had disappeared. Now it had been replaced by gratitude. And inside his heart, something even more precious had begun to grow. As summer faded into autumn, the floodwaters slowly disappeared. Many farms were damaged beyond repair. But because Jacob had shared his food, water, and pasture, dozens of families had survived until they could rebuild. Neighbors gathered one Saturday morning with wagons full of lumber, tools, and fresh supplies. This time, one rancher said, smiling, "We're helping you." Men repaired Jacob's old barn. Women planted flowers around Emma's garden. Children laughed as they painted a new wooden fence. The lonely rocky hill had become the happiest place in the county. A few weeks later, the townspeople gathered outside the little wooden church for the annual harvest celebration. Jacob stood beside Emma beneath a large oak tree glowing with autumn colors. He removed his hat. "When everyone laughed at this hill, you were the first person who believed in it." Emma smiled softly. "I believed in the man caring for it." Jacob took a deep breath. "I don't have fancy words. You don't need them. I'd like to spend every sunrise and every sunset with you." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "I'd like that too." As the church bell rang across the valley, Jacob gently held her hand. Their first kiss was simple, quiet, and filled with the promise of a lifetime. The people around them cheered with joyful hearts. 1 year later, spring covered the rocky hill with green grass and colorful wildflowers. The once forgotten land had become one of the strongest farms in the territory. Fruit trees grew beside the cabin. Healthy cattle grazed peacefully behind sturdy fences. Children from the nearby town often visited to learn how Jacob's stone terraces protected the soil and saved water. Emma now taught school during the week and spent evenings working beside Jacob in the garden they had planted together. Their home was always filled with laughter, fresh bread, and neighbors who stopped by for coffee around the campfire. One evening they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains. The valley below had been rebuilt. The people who once laughed now waved with grateful smiles whenever they passed. Emma rested her head on Jacob's shoulder. "Do you ever wish you had received the rich land instead?" Jacob looked across the rocky hill that had changed his life. He smiled. "No." He squeezed her hand gently. "The greatest blessings sometimes come wrapped in the things the world calls worthless." As the first stars appeared above the peaceful prairie, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying a quiet reminder that faith, kindness, and love can turn even the roughest ground into a place called home.